Good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. Today is Nelson Mandela International Day. In his remarks to observe the day at the General Assembly earlier today, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that Madiba's extraordinary life was a triumph of the human spirit. He endured the brutal weight of oppression and emerged not with a vision of vengeance and division, but of reconciliation, peace, and unity. Today, Madiba's legacy is now our responsibility, he added. The Secretary General congratulated the laureates of the 2025 Nelson Mandela Prize, Brenda Reynolds and Kennedy Odede. Both prize winners, he said, embody Nelson Mandela's words, which are engraved on their prizes. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, is what difference we have made to the lives of others. He added that as the UN celebrates its 80th anniversary, Nelson Mandela's legacy of reconciliation and transformation continues to inspire and drive us. As you know, yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General said to you after the conclusion of the informal meeting on Cyprus that the discussions were constructive, and both leaders reviewed the progress on the 6 initiatives they agreed in March to build trust. Out of these 6 initiatives, 4 have been achieved. The creation of a technical committee on youth, initiatives on the environment and climate change, including the impact on mining areas, the restoration of cemeteries, and an agreement on demining that will be closed once the final technical details are established. The Secretary General noted that discussions will continue on the remaining 2 initiatives, which are the opening of 4 crossing points and solar energy in the buffer zone. The Secretary General said that there's a long road ahead, and it's important to think about what the future can mean for all Cypriots. His full remarks were shared with you. Turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warns that the continued onslaught and mass deprivation of people in the Strip is being normalized. Every day brings more preventable deaths, displacement, and desperation. Just today, the Israeli authorities issued yet another displacement order, this time for parts of North Gaza. We also continue to receive deeply troubling reports of malnourished children and adults being admitted to hospitals with little resources available to treat them properly. OCHA warns that the energy crisis in Gaza continues to deepen, despite the resumption of limited fuel imports. That's because the small quantities entering, while critical to continue, remain at lower levels than what we were previously able to extract from dwindling internal reserves, which have now been fully depleted. The depletion of fuel has forced solid waste collection to pause over the past couple of days, and additional water wells have also had to shut down, particularly in Deir el-Bala. While specific health services, including dialysis, have reduced or shut down, others could go on for a few more days before they, too, will have to go dark. With every day that passes, people have less clean water and health care, and more sewage flooding ground floors. To give you some numbers, since the limited entry of fuel entry supplies resumed on the 9th of July, the UN has managed to send just over 600,000 liters of diesel to Kerem Shalom. And you'll recall that yesterday, for the first time, we were also able to send 35,000 liters of much-needed benzene. These volumes are limited because Israeli authorities have allowed only 14 trucks over the past week. This is on average 55,000 liters per day, including the weekends when the crossing is closed. As we've said before, to sustain life-saving operations, we need hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel every single day. The limited fuel now coming in is being allocated primarily to health, water, and telecommunication services, as well as to power vehicles. To give you some additional background, fuel is offloaded into an underground pipeline on the Israeli side of Kerem Shalom, then extracted on the Gaza side by separate Palestinian tankers. The compound there is fenced off and heavily militarized. For our drivers to access it, Israeli authorities must pause hostilities, give the green light, and allow enough time for extraction and safe return of our teams through highly dangerous terrain. This creates delays and further undermines the predictability of fuel flows. Meanwhile, humanitarian movements inside Gaza continue to be restricted. Yesterday, 7 out of our 13 attempts to coordinate the movement of aid workers and supplies with the Israeli authorities were facilitated, allowing our teams to retrieve some fuel, collect some water, relocate generators, provide supplies related to hygiene and sanitation, and transfer much-needed medical supplies. However, the 6 remaining attempts were either outright denied or approved initially, but then faced impediments on the ground. The Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Peterson, expressed his grave concerns over the continued violence in Ceuta and the targeting of civilians. He spoke last night with the interim foreign minister of Syria, Assad Shibani, and urged restraint and the protection of all communities, and called for accountability. Mr. Peterson stressed that stability and civil peace must prevail, and reprisals must be avoided. He added that Israel's provocative violations must stop now, and credible, orderly, and inclusive political transition in Syria must be the priority. Also on Syria, you will have seen that yesterday afternoon, Khalid Kiari, the Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, briefed the Security Council on the situation in Syria. He reiterated the Secretary General's condemnation of all violence against civilians. He also echoed the Secretary General's condemnation of Israel's escalatory airstrikes, including on Sueda, Daraa, and in the center of the capital, Damascus. His remarks were shared with you. This morning, the Secretary General's Special Representative for Colombia, Carlos Ruiz Massieu, briefed Security Council members in his last briefing in that post. He said that despite progress, the peace agreement's implementation continues to face serious challenges, mainly the limited presence of state institutions in some regions, where peace dividends are limited, armed groups proliferate, illicit economies thrive, and violence persists. He underscored the vital role of the international community in supporting Colombians as they strive to achieve a better future, stressing that this support remains as important as ever in helping maintain momentum towards peace. As you know, this was Mr. Massieu's last briefing to the Security Council before he takes up his appointment as the Secretary General's Special Representative for Haiti and head of the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti. His remarks were shared with you. And turning to Haiti, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs stresses the need to scale up support for displaced families in the country amid widespread insecurity that continues to drive people from their homes. As of last month, there were nearly 250 active displacement sites across Haiti. However, the vast majority are informal sites, with just over a fifth managed by humanitarian organizations in collaboration with local authorities. This means that many families are living in precarious conditions. Since the beginning of the year, the UN and our partners have provided support to more than 113,000 displaced people, including essential services such as water, shelter, sanitation, and healthcare. As we have mentioned, nearly 1.3 million people are now internally displaced in Haiti, the highest number ever recorded in the country due to violence. In June alone, more than 200 alerts were reported across displacement sites. These alerts are reports of urgent problems, such as lack of water, food, shelter, or healthcare. Over 80% were related to essential needs. This underscores the need to step up humanitarian assistance to help ensure the safety and dignity of displaced people living in extremely difficult conditions. However, the overall response remains severely constrained by limited funding and persistent insecurity. This is hampering humanitarian access to the most affected areas and delaying the delivery of aid. OCHA continues to work closely with Haitian authorities and humanitarian partners to coordinate relief efforts, strengthen on-the-ground presence, and mobilize additional resources to support displaced communities. Turning to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that ongoing violence in South Kivu and North Kivu provinces in the east of the country continue to claim the lives of civilians and trigger new displacement. In North Kivu, our partners on the ground in the territories of Rutshuru and Lubero reported that fighting between M23 and other armed groups continued until this past Tuesday. As of earlier this week, 8 civilians have reportedly been killed, with more than 42,500 people fleeing the fighting. In South Kivu, heavy clashes between M23 and other armed groups have persisted since early July in several territories, including Walungu, Kabare, Fizi, Mwenga, and Kalehe. Local partners say the fighting has displaced at least 37,000 people from their homes. A humanitarian convoy coordinated by OCHA, which was primarily planned for today, along the road between the provincial capital Bukavu and the city of Uvira, has been postponed due to a lack of necessary security guarantees for that route. Meanwhile, in villages across the border between North Kivu and Ituri provinces, attacks by ADF armed groups have reportedly killed at least 65 civilians, with dozens more injured. Many others remain missing. Significant displacement has been reported towards Beni and Mombasa territories. While precise figures are still being verified, our humanitarian partners stress that civilians urgently need humanitarian assistance, especially food, shelter, education, and basic services. Our partners and teams on the ground are doing their best to maintain services for those affected, but access restrictions and severe funding shortages pose significant obstacles. Halfway through the year, our $2.54 billion response plan for the DRC is less than 13% funded, with about $321 million received to date. As you can imagine, the lack of funding is putting the lives of millions of people in the DRC at risk. Many partners are forced to scale back their operations, disrupting essential services for those in need. OCHA calls on the international community to take urgent action to address these severe funding gaps and stave off a humanitarian tragedy. The UN Human Rights Office today warned that the surge in the number of Afghans forced to or compelled to return to Afghanistan this year is creating a multi-layered human rights crisis requiring the urgent attention of the international community. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk called for an immediate halt to the forcible return of all Afghan refugees and asylum seekers, particularly those at risk of persecution, arbitrary detention, or torture upon their return. The UN Human Rights Office stressed that countries in the region must ensure that returns to Afghanistan are voluntary, safe, dignified, and consistent with international law. The UN Human Rights Office also noted that women and girls who are systematically deprived of their rights in Afghanistan are particularly at risk upon their return. A report released today by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime shows that criminal groups in Ukraine are shifting business models as the war, now in its fourth year, has driven up displacement, trafficking risks, and demand for synthetic drugs such as methadone. UNODC warns that the war has not only inflicted untold suffering on the Ukrainian people, but has also triggered a marked evolution in organized crime, which can have profound implications on the country's journey towards recovery and reconstruction. The report, which is available online, includes several recommendations to help counteract and mitigate these crimes. Yesterday, the Secretary General announced the appointment of an independent scientific panel of experts tasked with examining the physical effects and societal consequences of a nuclear war on a local, regional, and planetary scale in the days, weeks, and decades following a nuclear war. The establishment of this 21-member panel is a response to a global environment in which the risks of nuclear war is higher than at any point since the depths of the Cold War. The panelists are leaders in their fields across a range of scientific disciplines and come from all regions of the world. The panel will hold its first meeting in September and will submit a final report to the General Assembly in 2027. We will provide a list of panel members for you right now. The UN Refugee Agency today released a report warning that following major cuts to humanitarian budgets, up to 11.6 million refugees and others forced to flee risk losing access this year to direct humanitarian assistance from UNHCR. The figure represents about one-third of those reached by the organization last year. The report highlights a deadly confluence of factors pummeling millions of refugees and displaced people: rising displacement, shrinking funding, and political apathy. And women and children are, as ever, the hardest hit. Altogether, $1.4 billion of essential programs are being cut or put on hold, according to the analysis of UNHCR programs and funds received this year. Cuts have forced UNHCR to pause the movement of new arrivals from border areas to safer locations in places like Chad and South Sudan, leaving thousands stranded in remote locations. In Uganda, malnutrition rates are soaring in some reception centers, with limited access to clean water and food. The full report is available online. As for international days, besides Mandela Day, on Sunday we will mark World Chess Day. Chess is one of the most ancient intellectual and cultural games. As an affordable and inclusive activity, it can be exercised anywhere and played by all across the barriers of language, age, gender, physical ability, or social status. Also, Sunday is International Moon Day. This day marks the anniversary of the first landing by humans on the moon as part of the Apollo 11 lunar mission in 1969. And on Monday, we will be joined by Ambassador Fatima Kyari Mohammed, the permanent observer of the African Union to the United Nations, along with Claver Gatet, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, and Cristina Duarte, Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa. They will be here to brief you ahead of the ministerial meeting and launch of the Africa Sustainable Development Report 2025, which will take place at the side event Africa Day at the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development on the 23rd of July from 1:30 to 4 p.m. That's it for me. Are there any questions? Yes, Deshi and then Nidhi.
It's been reported that 3 European countries, UK, France, and Germany, they told Iran to immediately start the negotiation on nuclear facilities, or otherwise they will reinstate sanctions on Iran. What is the position of the Secretary General on this?
Well, the Secretary General has made clear the need for Iran to abide by the resolutions the Security Council and also deal with cooperatively with the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so he hopes that they will use the opportunity to once more cooperate with the IAEA and ensure that concerns about Iran's nuclear program are fully addressed.
In this regard, has the Secretary General recently have any phone calls with the Iranian side?
There's nothing in the last few days to say, but obviously he has been in touch with different Iranian officials, and you'll have seen that we've consistently underscored the importance of cooperation with the IAEA in all those encounters. Edie and then Pam.
Thank you, Farhan. And apologies if you mentioned this. Satellite images have reportedly showed that Israel is demolishing thousands of buildings in Gaza since the end of the ceasefire, some damaged and some that appear to have been intact. Does the Secretary General have any comment on this, and does the UN have any confirmation of this?
Well, you'll have seen that in past months we've been sharing the information, including those provided by UNISAT, our satellite detection, about the rate of destruction of buildings in Gaza, and we've warned that it's unacceptable that so many buildings have been destroyed, that so many people have lost their homes, have been forced to flee, not once but several times over the course of the last 2 years. We continue to call on the Israeli authorities to avoid the sort of destruction of Gaza that has been occurring since October 2023, and we once more, of course, call for a ceasefire and the end of the fighting. Yes.
Thank you, Farhan. Follow up on Deshi's question about Iran. There are reports that senior diplomats from the E3 and Iran are expected in Europe next week to talk about the deal. Is any UN official expected at any of that?
I don't believe we're involved in this process. This is between the European countries and Iran. Of course, we've been engaging separately, and in particular continue to be involved with this process through the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Okay, and a UN, reform question. There have been some comments from the United States on the UN 80 reform proposals that reflect the fact that the U.S. considers the professional levels at the UN jobs, P2, P3, P4, to be that the U.S. is underrepresented relative to Australians, Europeans, British, India, Nigeria, and the Philippines. Do you have any breakdown of country appointments, assignments, and is that true? Thank you.
I believe there's a document that comes out every so often that shows staffing by nationality, so you can examine that for yourself.
And there's a recent one. And is there one that relates to the cutbacks? In other words, are certain jobs proposed to cut back on certain areas and countries?
The sort of reforms we're undertaking are still in process, so that is something that remains fluid at this stage.
And the most recent list that you're talking about would be?
I think from the last couple of years.
Okay.
It'll be available as a document.
Thank you.
Linda.
Thank you, Farhan. Farhan, I have a question regarding Gaza. The war's been going on quite a while, as we know. Bombings are occurring very often. How would you describe the relationship of the United Nations with Hamas? You're living in the same territory. You have large staff there. I was just wondering what kind of interaction or channels are there with Hamas, between the United Nations and Hamas?
We don't deal with Hamas as a movement. Obviously, there are de facto authorities on the ground in Gaza, and as with everywhere in the world, where there are groups who are the de facto authorities governing an area, we deal with them for operational reasons. But we we do that for the purposes of carrying out our mandated activities. That's the extent of it.
Is Hamas, for example, enforcing any kind of law and order in Gaza these days, or has that been totally relinquished? Clearly they're criminals in all cultures and all countries. So no one's dealing with the criminals?
Well, there are local police forces. Yeah. Some of those local police forces have not been able to do their work, and given the anarchic situation on the ground, obviously, as you just pointed out, everywhere in the world there needs to be some form of law and order, and we hope that order can be reestablished in Gaza. Yes, please.
So the Secretary General, thank you, Farhan. The Secretary General appointed a Japanese hibakusha, Masao Tominaga, to the independent panel on nuclear war. Mm-hmm. Can you provide some comment on the significance or the rationale behind the appointment?
Well, we're putting out a list of all of the members of the panel, so you can see all of the names and qualifications of the 21 members of this panel. We'll share that with you shortly. And with that, I wish you all a good weekend. Take care.